You were singing the role of Anne in Stravinsky's opera The Rake's Progress in Santa Fe just a couple of months ago. A wonderful performance. You're a marvelous Anne. I understand that's one of your favorite roles.
Well, you understand correctly. It's not only one of my favorite roles, but I think The Rake's Progress is one of my favorite operas, if not my favorite opera. I know that there are Stravinsky and W.H. Auden scholars in this country who think that the libretto is greatly flawed and therefore the music suffers. I was made aware last summer of a symposium at Princeton University where coincidentally my husband was also conducting the Rake's Progress, and I was told that the W.H. Auden scholar at Princeton University believes that the libretto and the music do not at all go together well. But I have to say, as perfect as anything is able of being in this world, I think that the Rake's Progress is pretty darn perfect. I find that the text that W.H. Auden and Chester Kallman invented from, the series of 8 paintings that are now prints of William Hogarth, telling this story about this young man in the countryside in London and how his life progresses, and the fact that he is always given the choice whether he'll listen to the good angel or the bad angel in his life. I think it's a lesson that is universal. I think it's a lesson for all of humankind, despite no matter what your race or your creed or your sex or your age. I think the fact that we can learn from Tom Rakewell's story is a very powerful thing. I mean, I go to the theater or to the opera or to the cinema many, many times for pure pleasure, but when you actually have the opportunity to learn an important lesson in life and to be reminded of one of the important things about becoming a mature and responsible adult, I think then the theater has its greatest impact. And for me, at least, this is the story of the Rake's Progress. The problems that you can run into when you want something that you don't have. In the wanting of something that Tom Rakewell doesn't have, he ends up selling off his soul in the process of getting it. I think in this day and age especially, which has become so materialistic, I think it's important, anything that reminds us that we have to be careful what we want, because in the process of getting what we want, we might find out that we've lost something very important, maybe even our souls. So I think the message of the Rake's Progress is a very, very big and important message, and I think it applies, like I said, it applies to all of humankind, no matter what color our skin, what creed we speak or don't speak, what our age is. It's a very, very wonderful lesson, and it's my hope that every time I'm involved in these performances of an opera like The Rake's Progress, that some of that comes across the footlights and maybe even into the hearts and minds of people listening and watching.
It certainly did in this performance. I think
Good.
People came out of the theater very moved from the experience, rather than seeing it just as a parody of an earlier form. Something. I'd like to talk a little bit about the music. This is a neoclassical work. How different is singing this work as opposed to the classical music on which it's based?
Well, they like to say that Stravinsky was writing a Mozart opera when he wrote The Rake's Progress. It is definitely 18th century-like writing. What do I mean by that exactly? I guess I mean things like the balance. There are forms in the piece which remind me very much of forms in Mozart arias, and I think, also in a lot of 18th century music, you find that the vocal line will be doubled by one of the instruments in the orchestra. In fact, in a lot of 18th century music, whether it's Handel or Bach or Mozart or Haydn, if you took your hand and put it on the score so that your hand was covering up the words, you'd find a vocal line that looked very similar, if not identical, to one of the lines in the orchestra score. Mm-hmm. And in a certain sense, Stravinsky, although it's very much 20th century music, the harmonies are a 20th century language. It was written in the early 1950s. We can't exactly call that modern music anymore. It's almost 50 years old. But it's neoclassical, neo-Baroque, neo-18th century, let's say, in that sense. And I think the fact that it's a small-ish kind of an opera. It's not grand opera. It's not the kind of an opera that should be done in a large opera house. I think the potency of the story might get lost if the singers are forced to think about projecting their voices to the sixth balcony. This is not that kind of piece. This piece needs to be done in theaters where you can see the whites of people's eyes, where the performers can really connect on a real level with each other and also with the audience. It is not grand, large opera in that sense, just like 18th century opera isn't big and oversized. So yeah, I think there are many ways in which it reflects on the 18th century, and my friends tell me, well, Sylvia, Stravinsky was trying to write a Mozart opera and he succeeded. I mean, there's another thing in the Rake's Progress, as you know, there is something called the epilogue, where all of the actors come out onto the stage at the end of the play, in quotes, and they basically speak directly to the audience and give them a sort of moral of the story. This is the moral of the story. Here it is. If you're idle, whether it's your hands or your heart, no matter which part of yourself that you let be idle, that's going to become the workplace for the devil. Okay, it's the same thing in Don Giovanni. You have a sort of an epilogue like that in Don Giovanni, where all of the actors come out at the end and say, "Okay, look, this is what you're meant to have learned from this."
Did you get it? Yeah.
Yeah, right.
We're going to hear an excerpt now from the work that you've recorded. This is Anne Trulove's aria, "No Word from Tom." If you would tell us where this appears in the story, what's happening at this point?
The aria "No Word from Tom" is Act 1, Scene 3 of the opera. At the beginning of the story, we meet Anne Trulove and Tom Rakewell. They're enjoying a simple, uncomplicated country life. I like to think somewhere down in Sussex, because I've spent so much time in Sussex working at Glyndebourne. But in any case, they're not in the city, they're not in London, and they have a relatively carefree life. They enjoy nature, they enjoy being in love. And in the middle of this ideal situation, of course, we learn about Tom that he is wishing for something he doesn't have. He says, "I wish I had money," and instantly, in the wishing for that, he opens the door of opportunity for the devil. In this story, he's called Nick Shadow, but it's a very Faustian story. Just as Faust asks for help, it isn't God who answers. It's the devil who answers. The same thing happens to Tom Rakewell. He wishes for something he doesn't have. Opportunity is there suddenly for the devil. Well, in any case, the devil arrives with this totally fabricated story that Tom has a rich uncle who has died and left him lots of money, but in inheriting this money, he's got to go to London to make sure that everything is looked after well and taken care of, and there are attorneys to deal with and papers to be signed. He's got to leave immediately and move from the countryside to London. So, of course, Anne is rather sad about this. This all happens very quickly, and their farewell is a very sweet moment in Act 1, Scene 1. Well, Nick does get Tom to London. They're living in London, and Nick, of course, starts whittling away at Tom. And the next scene we see is Nick has taken Tom to a brothel in London, where the lady in charge of the brothel, she's called Mother Goose, and she is going to give Tom his first sexual pleasures. She is going to show him what how a real woman does it, and give him all of that joy. Well, even in the middle of the brothel scene, we find out that Tom isn't happy. He's not enjoying this experience. He just is slowly but surely coming under the control of Nick Shadow, of the devil. Well, by Act 1, Scene 3, we're back in the countryside, and Anne is alone. It's probably, I'm not sure. In the opera score, there is an indication that it's 6 months later. In the libretto that Auden and Kalman wrote, it actually indicates something different than 6 months. But in any case, what we need to know is that a great deal of time has passed. Tom has not contacted her. And the opening recitative of the scene, it's a whole scene, she has a whole scene to herself. She says, "No word from Tom. Has love no voice? Can love not keep a Maytime vow in cities? Forgot. But no, to weep is not enough. He needs my help. Love hears. Love knows. Love answers him across the silent miles and goes." And that's sort of the opening recit, and then she starts into the slow part of the aria in B minor, my favorite key. And she basically prays to the moon for guidance, for strength, for help. She prays to God to take care of her father, who she's leaving behind. The situation of Anne, this 18th century girl who in the middle of the night packs a suitcase and leaves home for London, the big bad city of London, all by herself. The transition that Anne has to make, the leap that Anne has to make, the stretch for her to take on something like this, to go to London, knowing that Tom needs her help, to go and find him, not having a clue where to begin. I think this woman is just as real and as flesh and blood as any opera character that I have ever been involved with. And I think that another thing that Anne teaches me, at least, and I hope teaches other people, is that she is really the epitome of unconditional love. She represents utopia. Her love for Tom is completely unconditional and perfect and pure. Thusly she's named Anne Truelove. So that's the situation of Act 1, Scene 3, No Word from Tom. By the end of the opera, Tom has been with Nick and been under Nick's control now for a year and a day. And we know that because Nick says, "Okay, I've been working for you now for a year and a day, and it's time that you pay me." Well, of course, by this time, Tom has lost everything. He's lost his fortune. He's lost his possessions. In the meantime, he had even married a local star, Baba the Turk. And he's even lost his marriage. He has lost everything. But yet he still owes Nick Shadow the wages for a year and a day's services. He has nothing to pay Nick with, of course, that's the position Nick wants him in the whole time, because Nick really wants his soul, as the devil does, right? So we have a scene close to the end of the opera where they're in a cemetery, and Nick decides they'll play a game of cards. And if Tom wins, Nick will erase the debt. But if Tom loses, Nick gets Tom's soul. Well, I'll just briefly say that they play the game of cards. Nick, of course, plays a big trick on Tom, but luckily he is saved by his deep-seated belief in love and in Anne's love for him and in his love for Anne. In any case, the price that Nick Shadow extracts for having lost the game of cards is Tom's sanity. He takes away Tom's sanity. So, in the final scene of the opera, Act 3, Scene 3, we find Tom in Bedlam. He's in the insane asylum. He has lost his mind, lost his sense, and he has sort of continued to live in a totally new reality. His new reality is that he is Adonis, and Anne Truelove is Venus. Anne finds him. She finds out what's happened, and she goes to Bedlam and finds him. And in their first exchange, she says some of the most beautiful words, again, getting back to this fact that Anne Trulove teaches me a lot about the nature of unconditional love. Tom says to her, "In a foolish dream, in a gloomy labyrinth, I hunted shadows, disdaining thy true love. Forgive, forgive Adonis, and he shall faithful prove." He speaks about himself as Adonis. And Anne, who Tom thinks of now as Venus, responds, "What should I forgive? Thy ravishing penitence blesses me, dear heart, and brightens all the past." This is a woman who's lost her love, she's lost her innocence, she's lost the only things in life that really mattered to her, and literally instantly she's able to step into his world, step into his new reality, forgive him and love him in his world, which is of course a world of madness. And then she sings one of the most beautiful things I know of in all of opera. She sings the lullaby to him to help him rest and sleep and put his mind at peace. So maybe we'll hear the lullaby from the Rake's Progress, Act 3, Scene 3.
You have a disc out of music by Henry Purcell entitled The Echoing Air. It's a beautiful disc of songs. What was it that led you to Purcell's music in particular?
San Francisco.
Really?
No, it's true. I was singing at the San Francisco Opera in the fall of 1992. It was November, I happen to remember this very clearly, and the then Vice President of Artists and Repertoire at Phillips Classics and I were on the telephone across 2 continents, and we were, batting ideas around, trying to think up interesting projects, interesting things that might catch the eye of record buyers, and yet that were, close to my heart and something that my voice is well suited for. And I said to Anthony Freud at the time, I said, in 1995, we're going to be celebrating the tercentenary of Purcell's death. Henry Purcell was born in 1659, died in 1695. So if you're dyslexic, you'll never get it right. So in any case, 1995 was the tercentenary of Henry Purcell's death. So I said, I have been singing the music of Henry Purcell since I was in college. I started singing Purcell songs before I was even a singer, while I was still a violinist, studying the violin. I studied the violin for 17 years. I intended to be an orchestral musician.
Is that right?
That's what I wanted to do. So even before I had changed my focus from being a violinist to being a singer, I was already singing for fun the songs of Henry Purcell. Well, something that's that close to you and something that you have that many years worth of experience, it's silly to not put that alongside the fact that, 3 years down the road at that time was going to be this big Purcell anniversary.
And that's about the time it would take them to release the recording anyways.
Don't we just know that to be true? So in any case, it was actually not until the summer of 1994 that Christopher Hogwood and I had enough time in our schedules to sit down and make the recording. But I have to tell you, to be able to collaborate with someone like Christopher Hogwood on a recording of songs by Henry Purcell, I think of Chris Hogwood pretty much as the premier scholar and performer of English music of the 17th and 18th centuries. Certainly of the 17th century. He is such an expert in that repertoire, and our many, many conversations prior to the recording and then during the recording sessions, the rehearsals, he was just an amazing person to be able to stand by while we were doing this recording of Purcell songs. So then they released it, I think, in 1995, the Purcell Tercentenary, and lo and behold, it won a Grammy. So I was very pleased, because Henry Purcell isn't exactly what we'd call top 10 repertoire. So to be given the honor of winning a Grammy for Best Vocal Solo Recording especially for a project that was essentially my idea. It was very nice.
The thing that I like about it particularly, with this movement to authentic instruments and authentic performance and that, so many times you get performances of early music that's like everybody's walking on eggs. And I get so tired of hearing those kinds of performances. Yours is not. It sounds like it was written yesterday. It sounds very spontaneous.
Oh, good. Well, if it sounds spontaneous, I'm happy. The best thing we can do for music is to never do it the same twice, and to always make sure we're bringing 150% of our imagination and our physical and vocal gift at that particular moment, and make it come alive. So if any of that worked, I'm very, very happy.
It worked indeed, obviously, for a lot of people.
Thank you.
Why don't you pick a couple of the songs off there that you like particularly, and we can play those in a minute.
Well, one of the songs that I've probably been singing for, close to 20 years, because I started singing it when I was, a teenager, really. And it's called Music for a While. It's probably Henry Purcell's most famous song. So let's listen to Music for a While by Henry Purcell. When we were making this record, Christopher Hogwood was actually the sort of musical director of it, and so he chose the instrumentalists to play the gamba and the lute and the violin and the trumpet, and these were all of London's greatest Baroque specialists on each of those instruments. Well, it just so happens that living in London is a man named Larry Dreyfus, Lawrence Dreyfus. He's on the faculty at the Royal Academy for Music, but he comes from America. But he happens to be one of the great gamba players in London. Well, the lute player that Chris Hogwood chose is a guy who actually lives in upstate New York. He doesn't live in London, he just works in London a lot. His name is Paul Odette. So, when we recorded the famous British song Fairest Isle, which is sort of the 17th century version of God Save the Queen, we used soprano, of course, and the instrumentation of lute and gamba. And we suddenly discovered that the three performers performing Fairest Isle were all American. And I have not let Chris Hogwood forget that yet. Of course, Chris Hogwood being the epitome of British upper crust society, highly educated at Cambridge and Oxford. But the three of us who were recording Fairest Isle were all American. we got a big kick out of that.
What can you say? He picked the best people.
I tell you.
Several years ago, you came to San Francisco to sing with the San Francisco Performances series. You gave a solo recital. And many times performers, singers in particularly, when they first come out, they're a little bit stiff and it takes them a little while to warm up to the audience. When you came out,
I was extremely stiff, and it took me a long time.
You were not stiff in the least. There was an immediate rapport. You made everybody feel immediately at home and relaxing and enjoying the music thoroughly. And it seemed that undoubtedly that comes from certainly a confidence in what you're doing, but also there seems to be a real joy in performing.
What I can certainly tell you is that it does not come from confidence. I'm probably one of the most insecure people in the world, especially when it comes time to open my mouth and try and make beautiful music.
Nobody can sing that beautifully and not be completely confident in what they're doing.
I'll tell you that I feel very strongly about this. First of all, the two things. First of all, I don't think there's anything in the world that actually brings me more joy consistently than music. I love music. I just love music. I don't love the music business. I don't love everything about the music profession. I certainly hate traveling. But if we're just going to boil it down to the essence of what it is that I do, I love music. And I hope I love music every single day of my life. And I will certainly leave the stage when I start to feel as though I don't really love it. So if any of that happens to come out in a seeming joy for what I'm doing, it's as real as can be, because music just turns me on. I mean, it really turns me on. I've often said music is the most faithful lover you'll ever have, because no matter how much you give to it, it will always give you more back. No matter how much of your time and your energies and your heart and your soul you invest in music, it will always, always give you more back. Maybe not right on the spot, maybe not in, X performance on such and so a day, but in general, music will always give you more back than you've put into it. And in that sense, it's the most ideal lover you could possibly have. So, and the other thing is that's sort of part one of my answer. Part two of my answer is that when I think about the fact that Americans today, or anybody for that matter, we have so many options of ways to spend our time and our money, and the fact that concert halls are getting emptier and opera houses are getting emptier, and really it's more easy to just rent a video and curl up on the sofa in the evening. Our lives are so full of stress, we're so busy, we're all stretched so thin. And when I think about the fact that people go to a lot of effort to drive to the Herbst Auditorium at the museum and pay for parking, and it was not exactly a nice warm evening as I recall, it was kind of chilly. And people go to a lot of effort and a lot of expense to be at a performance. And I think we as performers need to respect that and try to give something to the people who have made the effort to be there with us. And hopefully, maybe even a little bit of music will work its way into their hearts and they'll end up loving music a little bit more by the end of the evening, too.
Another one of your recordings features music by Mozart and Handel. You sing the beautiful Mozart Exultate Jubilate. Many times singers refer to Mozart as being very healthy for the voice, in a sense of coming home. Do you find that to be true?
Oh, sure. I've heard a lot of singers refer to Mozart as a good tonic. It keeps you straight, it keeps you honest. I think Mozart is the great leveler. Sort of like that first time you go into the store in April or May and you start trying on bathing suits. This is the great leveler. Well, Mozart's the same way. There's nothing to hide behind. You have to be at your most honest and your most straight vocal health. I mean, you can't goof around with Mozart. You have to be absolutely on form to sing Mozart and make it sound good. I think it is really the great leveler. And in that sense, it is certainly healthy to get back to singing Mozart as often as possible.
I've often heard it referred to that it forces you to do healthy things with the voice.
And it forces you to be honest. The thing about being a voice teacher, so-called voice teacher, I'm kind of allergic to those words in the first place, being a voice teacher. The person that I happen to be studying with right now, I prefer to speak of him as my singing teacher, because singing is really what we're trying to do. Being a voice teacher, what in the world does that mean? Let's all try and figure out how to make a pear-shaped tone on a whole note. Well, that isn't going to do you much good when you're in the middle of a phrase, of a Mozart aria, and the stage director has asked you to hang upside down by your toenails, and we have to all learn how to sing. So I call my teacher my singing teacher. It's taken me a long time to find my sound, my voice. Another one of the mistakes that so-called voice teachers make is that they don't take the time, or they don't have the desire to find each person's individual quality. I think the greatest thing that a singer has, the greatest potential that a singer has, is to sound individual, to not sound like everybody else, to not sound like every single student from that particular voice teacher's studio. I think a voice teacher who tries to get a certain sound out of someone is doing them such a dishonor, and it's a terrible thing, and it happens all too often. I mean, I came out of Indiana University, which is probably the biggest, and some like to say the best opera school, opera training program in the whole country. And at Indiana University, the years that I was there, the opera program was incredible and the training was great, but at that time the music school was full of a faculty of voice people, voice teachers, who I don't think were really trying hard to encourage each of us to be individuals, to be unique. When you turn on the radio, for example, and you're listening to the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, I would say that 99 out of 100 people can't tell who the violinist is, probably. If you're very knowledgeable about recordings, you might be able to make an educated guess. But the one thing that a singer has is a way of sounding individual, because the voice is totally wrapped up inside your body. It's totally integrated with your spirit and your heart and your mind and your personality and your musical tastes. It's all integrated. So when we open our mouths, we shouldn't sound like everybody else. We should all sound individual. My favorite opera singer in the whole wide world lives in your town, Friederike von Stade. And the fact is, every time Flicka opens her mouth, you could never mistake her for anybody else. The same can certainly be said of Luciano Pavarotti or Cecilia Bartoli, another singer who I have a whole big lot of respect for. I think she is just sensational. And, you know, there are many other singers, or not enough, but there the great singers, the great singers of the world. When you hear them start to make a sound, you know immediately who they are. And so I think, you know, I've been in the music business, in the profession now for 15 years, and it took me a very long time to find a teacher who I trust. That's saying a lot. That's saying a lot.
Yes.
Actually can trust a teacher with looking after your vocal health, with guiding you in the right directions of the ways to use your instrument. But, you know, in singing, I think we let it get too complicated a lot of times. I think getting back to the basics and keeping it simple is probably the best way to be a singer. Make sure you're breathing. Make sure you're using your breath both as in the way you inhale but also in the way you exhale. Make sure that breath keeps moving. I'm constantly working on trying to open up my body to receive not only oxygen, but to receive everything that the cosmos has to offer, so that when I exhale with a tone, there is enough inside of me to put something out that's worthwhile. But, you know, just finding where the tensions are in your jaw or your face or your neck, making sure that the breath doesn't get tangled up in your neck and your shoulders and your chest, you know, making sure that your breath is nice and low and the support comes from as deep inside of you as you can possibly make it come. I mean, I know we don't have lungs as far down as our pubic bone, but at the same time, I think you need to be very aware of your entire torso when you take in a breath to sing. But like I said, it's taken me a long time, and I'll tell you, there's nothing like being on the firing line to teach you how to do something. You know, it's one thing to do things in studios, but it's another thing, very different thing, to be doing it while you're actually under performance pressure. And all of the theory in the world can go out the window when you're actually standing on the stage, and you've got to get it out there. That's the best teacher of all.
You have two recordings out of American songs, one of songs of Jerome Kern and another songs by Harold Arlen. Tell us a little bit about those.
Well, you've asked for it. I'm going to tell you. I think that American songs from the first half of the 20th century, I think of this really as America's leader, Lieder, the American song. And I think some of these songs are the greatest music that American composers have created, even though they've been created for the Broadway stage or the Hollywood cinema. I think some of these songs by the American classic composers like Jerome Kern, like George Gershwin, like Cole Porter, like Irving Berlin, like Harold Arlen. And then, of course, into the second half of the century, we've got Stephen Sondheim and Leonard Bernstein, even Rodgers and Hammerstein. I love this music. I absolutely love it. The fact that I've made two recordings of songs American so-called popular songs, has come about because my record company asked me to do it, and we asked Andre Previn, the greatest jazz pianist alive, we asked him if he would collaborate with me, and he very, very graciously said yes. And I really mean it when I say Andre Previn is the greatest jazz pianist alive. I think the volume of information that Andre Previn brings to the keyboard, years and years and years, decades of experience being an orchestrator and then a composer in Hollywood, and then decades of experience being a conductor in front of the great symphony orchestras of the world, conducting Mozart and Haydn and Strauss and Mahler and Brahms, and then decades of experience as a classical composer himself, and all the while he continued to play the piano, whether he was playing Mozart concertos with the London Symphony or jazz projects with Ray Brown. The volume of information that Andre brings to the keyboard is just, it's monumental. And I don't think there is another musician alive on the planet Earth who has as much to bring to this particular repertoire as Andre Previn does. So to be able to embroider these songs with Andre is, I don't need to tell you what a great honor that is. And he has taught me a great deal about this music, not to mention that all of his stories from his years and years and years with this repertoire are great fun. So in any case, we've now done 2 projects. The first is called Sure Thing, songs by Jerome Kern, and the second is called Come Rain or Come Shine, songs by Harold Arlen. When Andre and I were doing Right as the Rain, every single time we performed it, and certainly when we were recording it, we would finish doing this song, and both of us would just sort of look at each other and go, this song is on the same level with the greatest songs by Franz Schubert. Now, I'm not saying that every song Harold Arlen wrote was on that level, but this particular song called Right as the Rain is on the very same level with An die Musik or Die Forelle. I mean, any of the famous and great Schubert songs, I believe, in my opinion. So that would certainly be one that I would love for all of you to hear. And another song that's very interesting on that record is a song called The Morning After. The Morning After has lyrics that were written by Dori Previn. Dori was Andre's second wife and was his collaborator in Hollywood when they were doing film scores together. And Dori wrote some beautiful words for the song called The Morning After. When Andre and I were rehearsing the song and working on it, sort of getting it ready to record, we were in London at the time, and every single time we would finish the song, I would look over at the piano, and Andre had tears in his eyes because, it was coming back to him from a period in his life 30 or 40 years ago when he was married to Dori and when they were, on the top of the mountain in Hollywood and, could basically do no wrong. And of course that relationship came to an end for whatever reasons, but, there is still a very soft spot in Andre's heart for Dori. And here I was, a whole generation later, doing this particular song with Andre, the then husband of the lyricist. And so I'd also like for you to listen to The Morning After by Harold Arlen and Dori Previn.
You do a lot of singing of music in English. How do you find singing English as opposed to, say, more traditional vocal languages in classical music, say, Italian?
Well, English is my mother language, so obviously it's the language I'm most comfortable with. Singer...
Even in terms of singing, even in terms of technical singing.
Oh, sure. Because I started out my singing in a choir, and I had a fantastic choir master. And, good choral technique, you learn about enunciation. You learn about how to have good diction. You just learn about it. I mean, I started singing in a choir of someone who was one of Robert Shaw's protégés. Well, it doesn't come any better than that. I mean, Robert Shaw's choruses are the best in the world, and always have been since the minute he stepped up on the podium and front of a choir. But I love singing in English because it's the best way I can directly communicate with a listener, obviously. I did a rather brash thing last winter. I did a huge recital tour of Europe, and I sang in places like Paris and Munich and Berlin and major European capitals, German, French capitals, and I was singing a whole program in German and French.
Oh.
And that's a rather obnoxious thing to do. I've actually worked in Germany and Austria enough that I speak German, but to be quite honest with you, I do not speak any more than survival French and survival Italian. I mean, I can get myself into the hotels and certainly manage in the restaurants, but I take language very seriously when I have something that's in one of those languages. Singers are all expected to be very, very proficient, and if not fluent, certainly proficient in Italian, French, and German. That's a tall order. To be, if you don't happen to have a gift as a linguist, or if you haven't started speaking those languages as a young child, it's a very tall order to be fluent in 4 languages just as part of your profession. That's a very, very tall order. So most of us who are not fluent in all 4 languages work very hard, I certainly do, work very hard to study the texts of music that I'm singing. I translate it to within an inch of its life. I translate every single syllable. The effect that a syllable will have on a word and how that word then figures into the whole sentence. I mean, I study like a demon. I study like a beginner every single chance I get. I have a fantastic language teacher in Nico Castell at the Metropolitan Opera. He is stunning. In fact, I just finished doing some songs in Portuguese with Nico Castell. Now, nobody expects singers to be fluent in Portuguese, but there's some beautiful music written in the Portuguese language, and we have to do a decent job of it. So it means learning languages besides the 4 basic Italian, French, German, and English languages.
We've been talking with soprano Sylvia McNair, and it has been an absolute pleasure. And what you've had to say is as interesting as the recordings that we've been playing.
Well,
and this has been a real joy, and it's been a delight to have you on the program.
Pleasure is mine. Anytime I can get to San Francisco, even if it's over the airwaves, I'm happy.
Well, please come back and sing for us anytime.
Thank you.